This is a first impressions comparison between the RG351mp and the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. RG351mp feels significantly more premium and is significantly heavier than the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. If you plan on buying this for a child, I would not recommend it because it is heavier to hold and will probably get uncomfortable for them in long play sessions. The X, Y, B, and A buttons on the RG351mp are extremely comfortable to press. They have a very nice click, and they are fairly quiet as well. They are large enough to easily hold your thumb over the Y and B button, the Y for run and B for jump in platformers. Overall, I think these buttons are really good. Start and select buttons are at very ideal locations and easy to press. The D-pad on this device is really good. It's very easy to press left, right, up, down, very responsive, and it's very quiet as well. The only small issue with it is due to the fact that it's raised a little bit high in the shell. I don't know if that's due to the fact that this is the metal version or not. I heard people saying that it had something to do with it being the metal version, but because it's raised slightly higher, you might accidentally, when you're going, say, back and forth really quickly, make a misregistered input and push it slightly down left like that, or up left or up right or down right, which will cause you to either, crouch or aim up when you meant just to run to the left or the right. Although that really hasn't happened that often for me, but it's just something to be aware of. The analog sticks on this device are really good. They have a large amount of travel, and they feel very nice to rotate, and they also have a click. Both of them do. The triggers are the one set of buttons that I don't like on this device. They're very obnoxiously loud, and they're uncomfortable to press. That being said, one positive is that they're very recessed into the shell, so if you drop this, you wouldn't have to worry about the triggers breaking. Keeps it very low form factor device. One other thing I noticed is when I was playing a racing game, Mario Kart 64, and holding, I think it was this one's drift, when I pressed it all the way down, it would drift, but then when I released the pressure just slightly, it deactivated the button, even though I didn't fully release it and hear the click. So that's something to be aware of, but it's not a big deal, just something to get used to. On the bottom here, you get two SD card slots. The left one is for the operating system and the right one is for your storage. This is great because you can install whatever operating system you want on here. Well, whatever operating system is supported. Whereas on the RG or the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, you can only use Android, and that is on the internal storage. It only has one SD card slot. So now let's move over to the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. Retroid Pocket 2 Plus is significantly lighter than the RG351mp, and it's a lot easier to hold because you got this bottom piece along here that sits nicely in your hand, versus the RG351mp, which can get a little uncomfortable for long play sessions, especially if you're mainly using the left joystick. Whereas here, the joystick sits a lot higher and it's easier on your hand. Now the buttons, the X, A, B, and Y buttons, I did not like these when I first used them, and I still don't really like them. The first issue with them is they feel like sandpaper when you're pressing them down. Now this could just be my unit, but I've heard a lot of other people complaining about these buttons. And another issue with them is that they are very small. So if you wanted to, say, use your thumb in a platforming game, you say you're holding X to run and A to jump, it does not feel nearly as comfortable as the RG351mp. Plus, they require significantly more pressure to push them down. So in terms of the buttons, the RG351mp easily wins. The D-pad is actually very similar to the RG351mp, but it's just stiffer. It's a lot stiffer, but I don't have any problems with it. And as well, it's harder to do diagonal movements. So for certain people, this may be an issue in fighting games, but for me, since I mainly play platformers and I don't want to accidentally press crouch when I'm running back and forth, I would say this D-pad is a little bit better, in my opinion. Start and select buttons are not in an ideal location because when your hand is sitting here, you have to reach down here and you can't really see them where they are. And you might accidentally press the home button, which will actually take you out of the game, which can be extremely annoying. So overall, I'd give that win to the RG351mp, although at least you have a home button on this device. On the 351mp, you do not. Where this device does win, however, is with the triggers. These triggers are significantly better than the RG351mp. They're quieter, they're easier to press, they're comfortable to press, and they don't have that other problem I mentioned before where if you release a small amount of pressure, it doesn't deactivate. It only deactivates when you hear the click. Yeah, these triggers are way better than the RG351mp. That being said, because they are stacked, they do stick out the back a little bit, making it not as pocket friendly, and if I dropped it on this trigger, I would be concerned about breaking it. But that's just me. Oh, while I'm here, I might as well mention this. So that port right there on the left, that's a micro HDMI out port, so you can connect this to a monitor. The RG351 does not have an HDMI port. It used to in older models, but for some reason the RG351mp, they removed it, which is stupid because, you know, maybe some people don't care about that, but for me, if I brought this to a friend's house and I want to hook it up to a TV, this would be very handy. That is, if I had any IRL friends. Back here, you do have an SD card slot, but you only have one SD card slot. The operating system, as I said before, is on Android. So you have to use the operating system they give you. You can't use anything else. And you only get one SD card slot. That being said, the headphone jack is also down here as well, though, which I think is a better position for it to be down here than on top, like the RG351 did, but that's just nitpicking. This analog stick is not anywhere near as good as the RG351mp. It is functional though, it works fine, but it just doesn't have as much range, and it also does not click down. And then this one isn't even an analog stick, it's actually just a slider, similar to the 3DS slider. Again, not a lot of games are going to use another analog stick, but for those that do, this is not going to work that well. Now let's talk about the screens. They both have 640 by 480 resolution, and in terms of the color, they both look very similar, although there is a widespread issue going around with the Retroid Pocket 2s in which there is light bleeding on the left and on the right. On my units, on the left and the right. But to be honest, it's really not that much of an issue for me. I mean, I don't really care, but for some people it is an issue. Whereas with the RG351mp, there's no light bleeding at all. The screen is perfect. But I think that's a unit by unit basis type of thing. But just know that the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus, a lot of these units have that issue. Let's go into some last features. The RG351mp lacks a lot of features, which is kind of an issue. There's no Bluetooth on this device. There's no touchscreen, so Nintendo DS games are out of the question. There's no Wi-Fi either, so you have to use a dongle attached up here. And there's no HDMI out, as I mentioned. The Retroid Pocket 2, on the other hand, does have an HDMI out. It has Bluetooth 5.0, and it has Wi-Fi. And it has a touchscreen. And it has a better chip and better performance, so you can run Nintendo DS on this, to a certain extent anyway, on this small screen. And you can connect it to a display and connect controllers wirelessly. In conclusion, which device would I recommend? Unfortunately, I am going to have to recommend the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus. The amount of features it has far outclasses the RG351mp. It has Bluetooth, it has Wi-Fi, it has a touchscreen, it has HDMI out, and it has a far better chipset. Yes, the buttons aren't as great, and yes, it runs Android, whereas you can run any version of Linux on this, But in terms of hardware, the Retroid Pocket 2 easily beats the RG351mp, and it's only half the price. I'm hoping that Anbernic will eventually make another model just like this one with a significantly better chipset along with Wi-Fi, a touchscreen, and HDMI out in this form factor. But until they do, I'd have to say the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus is the winner.